That was an excerpt from The Raven and the First Men with James Campbell and the New Zealand String Quartet, music composed by Timothy Corlis, introducing our feature interview this afternoon. Now, we've all seen the image of The Raven and the First Men. It's a sculpture by Haida artist Bill Reid, because the image appears on the back of the Canadian $20 bill. It's a huge sculpture made of a 4.5-ton cube of 106 laminated beams of cedar, and it now stands in the Vancouver Museum of Anthropology. It was the inspiration for a film and a piece of music that we just sampled. Virtuosi Concerts will present this film and the music performed live as part of their concert on Saturday evening, featuring the New Zealand String Quartet and clarinetist Igor Begelman. The composer is Timothy Corlis. He's from the Kitchener-Waterloo region, now making his home in Vancouver. He's a busy composer and teacher, and he started singing when he was young in community choirs, and today he's particularly noted for his choral compositions. Timothy Corlis and clarinetist Igor Begelman join me in our Classic 107 studios. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Well, Tim, first of all, tell us about your Winnipeg connection.
Sure, glad to. I lived in Winnipeg for 2 years and taught at Canadian Mennonite University.
All right.
And still have lots of friends there and enjoyed my time teaching there greatly. It's a very special school. It's a wonderful place for students to study music.
All right. Well, now you are based in Vancouver, and, this sculpture, The Raven and the First Men, I wonder if you can describe it for us and describe its power.
Sure. Well, when I was asked to write the piece, the idea of writing a piece inspired by a sculpture wasn't part of the original commission.
Uh-huh.
And that came about because of spending a lot of time at UBC. At the time, I was doing my doctoral degree there, and the campus, well, often, but at that time was under tremendous construction.
Mm-hmm.
And, competing with construction noise when you're composing is difficult. Right? So there were two places that I usually found refuge. Well, actually three. One was the beach,
right?
Listening to waves.
Of course.
Another was the beautiful rainforested land around the university, where you often hear rain falling, and the movement you just heard, is you hear a lot of raindrops.
I'm sure.
The pizzicato strings, the blink, 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 blink. That's rain falling, right?
All right.
And then the third place I spent a lot of time was the Museum of Anthropology, and that's where Bill Reid's sculpture is housed, and it's a massive sculpture. It's about, Bill Reid was a huge man. There's a photograph online of him sitting beside it, and he's about 6'4", and the sculpture is just a little bit bigger than him. It took him 5 years, along with 5 other assistants, to carve it.
Wow.
So it's a magnum opus. So,
yes.
Yeah.
What is the power of the piece?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Bill Reid used to be on the $20 bill. It's actually not anymore because
right.
of the money's changed recently. But Bill Reid was a very courageous sculptor in many ways. He had Haida ancestry, but he wasn't raised Haida. And so the art that he became famous for was a kind of an adventure for him to reclaim and relearn his tradition.
I see.
And Raven and the First Men, I resonated deeply with the image of the raven, right? It's this massive, imposing bird, right? It's like, and the legend behind it is this story of this trickster raven, causing trouble, going around creating things. And the beginning of the world happens when the raven unleashes the sun and the moon, and one of the other things he unleashes is on the beach. Opens up this clamshell because he's curious, and out come, the Pandora's box, people.
Oh, all the little men.
Yeah, and so it's Raven and the First Men, because
Yes.
that's the story of how men came into the world. There's another story about how women came into the world.
Okay. And I should say to listeners that the image is on our website at classic107.com, so you can have a look. It really is so striking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's lots and lots of images of it online. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, how did you go about setting your impressions in music then?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned, there's sort of a confluence of three environments, right? So you heard sort of raindrops falling there, but the other thing you'd hear in that movement is the waves, right? In the middle of it, you hear the quartet starts. They're playing pizzicato for most of the movement, right? Like plucking the strings, but then they start playing with their bows, and that section, it's the ocean.
I see.
So you feel the waves rolling in, ba 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 ba, right? And these waves start to take over. And you think about the, relationships between visual, spatial art forms and sound. Like that sculpture is very motivically driven, and the motif is an oval, right? So every angle you look at it from, there's some sphere or some oval. There's the eyes of the characters, the faces are round, the clamshell itself is round. Yes. An oval sort of encapsulates the wingspan of the bird. So these circular patterns, like breath, start to govern, the way the music unfolds. So that's sort of one connection between and Igor, actually, I noticed that you were circular breathing when you were playing earlier. I don't know if you want to say anything about that. But.
Sure.
Well, yes, circular. Thanks for noticing. It's not you don't see too many people actually paying attention to something like this, but it came in very useful because when you have nature doesn't really have to breathe. I mean, it breathes in its own way, but it doesn't have the limitations that human body does. So when you're trying to portray waves, you have the pretty much unlimited power of continuous wave that you can sustain with circular breathing, and for those not familiar with the idea, it's, to put it in simple terms, it's the ability to inhale and exhale at the same time.
Yes, quite an accomplishment. And just a bit of background, clarinetist Igor Begelman grew up in Ukraine. Then he came to North America, studied at Juilliard, and now lives in New York. And he's performed with ensembles around the world as a soloist and as a chamber musician. And he's also taught at a number of universities around the U.S. Just in general, Igor, what is it like to play this music?
Well, anytime you deal with new music, it's always exciting because the repertoire in particular for clarinet is quite limited. Clarinet being probably the youngest instrument, it is definitely the last one admitted into the symphony orchestra. We have definite limitations in repertoire, so having a new piece is always exciting, and having a new piece that is really great is even more exciting. And when I was asked to do this, I really couldn't wait to play. I immediately started looking for ways to hear Tim's music and to get an idea of what it might be like. And then I got to hear some of the recordings that the New Zealand Quartet did with James Campbell, and it really impressed me. So yesterday I had a pretty long trip from New York, but despite all of that, I was very excited to have the rehearsal this morning.
Right. We just heard that was so ethereal sounding, that second movement. What other kinds of moods do you create in the music?
I think the story of the Raven is quite fascinating, and I think it really covers pretty much the whole range of emotions throughout. There's a lot of mystery because I think when Raven is flying around, and it's, again, I'm taking this from what I hear from reading some of these stories and this mythology. He is looking for things, so anything that he finds is something new for him. Mm-hmm. So every movement brings some sort of surprise. So there is mystery, there is sadness, there is excitement, there is definite calm, there is fury at some points. So I think in many ways the music really covers the whole range of emotions, and that's what makes the piece so effective. And you don't need to have an hour-long piece to cover all of this. You have 6 movements. They're not very long movements, but nevertheless they cover so much that the audience would truly enjoy it. And you have a film that accompanies that. It's really quite an exciting experience.
Yes. And is it a challenge to coordinate it with the film? How does that work on stage?
I think I'll have Tim speak to that.
Yeah, so the filmmaker, his name is David N. Dorrington.
Yes.
He lives in Vancouver, and he actually deserves some credit for the inspiration, because he and I are quite good friends, and I had discussions with him about, well, David, how do I create a piece of music using Western instruments, violins and cellos and a viola and a clarinet, about a First Nations carving?
Yes.
What's the connection here? And he says, Tim, it's wood. They're all made of wood. And it's, he's okay. Yeah, thanks, David. But he's absolutely right.
Yeah, yeah.
The medium is the universal, right, between the two cultures. And Bill Reed actually talked at great length about cedar and how cedar is such a perfect carving medium because it holds the shape. And if you talk to instrument makers, they'll have exactly the same conversation, right, about the type of wood they use to make the violin or the different parts of the instrument that have different types of wood and so on.
Yes.
So we created a film where he spent hours and hours meticulously photographing the sculpture and also photographing instruments close up. So he took pictures of violins, like really, really, really close up, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like the bridge, or just the fingerboard, and then intersperse these close-up images of the instruments with close-up images of the sculpture, right? Another thing that's sort of neat, Igor, you were mentioning about the variety in the piece, right? So that was one of my goals, is to have lots of variety, and I always try to do that. But the challenge when you have lots of variety is to create something that feels cohesive, and that, it's like, wow, it's just the Movement 5 and Movement 1, were they written by the same composer? So one way to do this was to use two styles. So there's these longer movements, like the one you just heard, are kind of in this romantic, lush style, that's very warm with lots of long phrases. And then I was thinking, like the original carving was a little box carving, the size of one's hand. And so Bill Reed was originally a jeweler.
Oh, okay.
He made jewelry, right? So he was used to working with miniatures, and so he carved the Raven and the First Men as a miniature. And I remember actually meeting a lady that was living in the same house with him as he was carving that. And there's two interesting things about that little sculpture. One is that it's very small, and then the other is that the one of the characters that's coming out of the clamshell in that carving has a labret on the bottom lip, and that's something that only women wear in Haida culture.
Oh, so what is it exactly?
A labret is like a piece of jewelry that's worn in the lower lip, right?
Okay.
It's like a circular, extends the lower lip. So, and then I looked at the same character in the big sculpture, and there's no labret. Mm-hmm. So I can't imagine why he did that, except to try to. He's consistent with Raven and the First Men.
Yes. But
then you look at the face, and you kind of say, I got curious, and I started looking at photographs of his mother, and it's strikingly similar facial features, right? Uh-huh. So I think it's fair to say that it's actually Raven and the First Men and Bill's mom.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So
that's great.
Gives you an idea.
Okay. Now, does the music exist only with the film, or can it be played all by itself?
Yeah, the piece has been performed on its own, and people have a different experience that way. But the thing that's nice about the film is that you can see very up close what inspired the music, right? So
yes.
Not everybody's been to the Museum of Anthropology, mm-hmm. right? So, yeah.
All right. Now, aside from your degree in music, you also have a degree in social and political thought from York University, and you've said that you view music as a strong power for social change. Now,
absolutely. Yeah.
How does that philosophy come through in your work?
Well, when I was younger, I spent a lot of time involved in the peace movement and going to protests and so on. So. Music for me, I came to composing fairly late professionally. It wasn't until I was well into my 30s that I was composing professionally. And I've always seen it as sort of an extension of that activist upbringing. So music and peace for me kind of go together. Right now I'm in Vancouver and spending most of my time composing, but one of the other projects I'm involved in that I'm very excited about is it's a store on Granville Island called Gandharvaloka World Music. And the whole idea behind this world music store is the connection between peace and music.
Really?
And we're kind of developing a dream to open a world music school with the same vision in maybe 2 or 3 years on Granville Island.
Oh, that's just fascinating. All right. Igor, I know that you have been a part of premieres of other contemporary pieces. How important is new music to you?
It is important, as I mentioned earlier, with the limitations of a particularly clarinet repertoire. New music, new composition, whatever it might be, is always exciting time. And I think most pieces that I've played, I've enjoyed thoroughly. There are always exceptions. Sometimes the piece may not be as effective, or it may not work. But generally, I find that it's a really important time to work with between the composer and the performer. And what I found frequently that unless there is a precedent already, the piece has already been played, the way that I view a new piece as a performer is often might be different from what the composer had in mind. And it is not a surprise to me when I play a new piece, a composer goes, "Oh, I didn't realize it would work that way, but it worked, and I like it." So I think that composer brings an idea, and then the performer interprets it a certain way, and it really contributes to the eventual success of the piece.
Yes. Well, along with this new piece by Tim Corlis that you're performing tomorrow, you're also playing with the New Zealand String Quartet, one of the great masterworks of chamber music. It's the Clarinet Quintet by Mozart. And you're playing a special instrument. Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. Yes, certainly Mozart Clarinet Quintet is a masterpiece, but who knows, maybe 200 years from now, Raven and the First Men will be a masterpiece. So here's the thing. Mozart was the first serious composer for clarinet that whose music became to be probably the most important in the repertoire. And there's a lot of mystery as to what the instruments were like, even though there are some drawings and there are some old instruments that were found in various archives and museums. But there is evidence that Anton Stadler, who was the clarinetist friend of Mozart's, he was one of the foremost virtuosos of the time, was also an inventor and kind of an adventurous man. So he commissioned a special instrument for Mozart's compositions. And the instrument was a hybrid between Mozart's favorite instrument, which was basset horn, and a regular clarinet. Now, basset horn is an instrument that Mozart uses in his Requiem. And it is believed that Mozart thought the basset horn has the closest sound to the human voice. So Stadler wanted to create something in between where he is able to have the fluidity and flexibility of regular clarinet and maintain the range of a basset horn. A basset horn has a slightly larger range. So the instrument that I'm using for this piece is called a basset clarinet, which is truly a hybrid between basset horn and clarinet. What it is a clarinet in the key of A, which is something that most professionals have, with an extension at the bottom, which gives you 4 notes. And one would say, well, how could 4 notes be so important? Well, what those 4 notes do is that they give you the ground note of the key of the composition, which means that you can produce the lowest note of the key, of the tonality of the piece, and it allows you to really cover the whole range without having to break the passages simply because you're running out of notes. So you can start all the way at the bottom and go all the way to the top in a continuous motion, sweeping motion. And that is a very effective tool. And one thing about it is that since the score for this instrument has also been lost, it becomes an interpretive thing. You have to look at the editions, publications that are published for regular clarinet and determine yourself as to where Mozart would have had in mind. Some places are obvious and some places are not so. So these days I would say that when people hear performance on the basset clarinet, it becomes you're hearing one's interpretation or sort of creative idea of what Mozart may have had in mind, or trying to complete Mozart's thoughts.
Okay, well, that sounds so fascinating. I mean, hear a new approach to Mozart after all this time. And so thank you. We'll look forward to the Mozart and also to the Winnipeg premiere of The Raven and the Little Men by Timothy Corlis. And Tim Corlis, Igor Begelman, thank you so much for coming in today.
You're most welcome.
Thank you for having us.